Hello, students. It's Mr. Taylor here, hoping to share with you another short video about Unit 2, specifically Summary and Paraphrase, since those are two really important tools that we're going to be using and developing for our second major project. And so I'm going to go over a few things here, but before I do, I just want to emphasize that the skills that we're developing and we're practicing from writing personal essays to practicing summary and paraphrase and synthesis to learning to read rhetorically. All these different skills are building off one another. And ultimately, we are fine-tuning skills that we're going to end up using for projects later on. So for example, for Unit 2, we're going to be practicing paraphrase and summary, and those are two skills that you're going to need to practice and demonstrate for the third unit, which is the rhetorical analysis. Before you begin your rhetorical analysis, you're going to have to spend some time summarizing and paraphrasing the main argument of the essay or article that you're analyzing. And so we're practicing that and we're developing it before we move on to essay number 3. So what I'd like to do first is I'd like to take a look at the Blackboard page. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so this is our Blackboard page. You can see that this is Unit 2, Reading the Conversations. And up here, there's an introduction to the second unit. And then there is an in-depth assignment description for your second major essay for this course. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that up in front of us. And I'm not going to go through the entire essay assignment. I want to keep this video relatively short. If I go on too long, it's going to be harder to keep your attention. And so what I want to do is I want to look at the prompt and the scenario very quickly. So you can see Project 2, Summary and Synthesis, essay with a writer's memo. What I'm doing is I'm looking at the prompt right here. And so what it says is, imagine that an editor has decided to create an anthology of texts for first-year writing classes and wants a section of the anthology to include text from our course's Unit 2. You've been tasked with writing the introductory explanation for a set of readings for this group of texts. The editor asks that you include 1, an opening paragraph that synthesizes the conversation around the text, and then number 2, summaries of 2 texts from the unit that you've chosen to include. These summaries should both explain the context of the text and explain the author's arguments. And so I'm not going to discuss synthesizing right now, but what I want to do is I want to focus on summary. And so what you're going to be doing is you're going to read the set of readings for this unit. And just to show you, you can find all those readings down here underneath this folder, Unit 2 Readings. If you click on it, it will go ahead and it will bring up the 4 readings. So what do these articles all have in common? Obviously, they're all about climate change, and so that's going to be our focus for Unit 2. And so these are the readings that you're going to be looking at, that you're going to be synthesizing, and that you're going to be summarizing for the assignment. Remember that you're just going to be summarizing 2 of these articles, but you'll want to read all 4 of them. And so what I want to do now is I want to look at a short handout that I made for the class and sort of go over a couple of key points about summary and paraphrase. The first thing I wanted to do, I wanted to talk about a little bit about the difference between paraphrase and summary. And all this information that I'm using is actually from your textbook. Specifically, it is from chapters 2 and chapters 3. This right here is specifically from chapter 3. And this chapter is really, really useful. It goes into a lot more specificity about these terms, but it also puts these terms into practice. And it actually has a few really good examples of paraphrase and summary. And so I highly recommend and I beg you to read these chapters and to use them to help develop these skills. And so let's start with paraphrase. What is to paraphrase? According to the dictionary, to paraphrase is to express the meanings of using different words, especially to achieve greater clarity. A paraphrase is frequently about the same length as the original passage And finally, when do you use paraphrase? You paraphrase when all the information in the passage is important, but the language is not key to your discussion, or if it may be difficult for your readers to understand. And so when you summarize, you condense information down to just the key essential points. But when you paraphrase, you're relaying that information, but you're using different language to do so. And when is it appropriate to paraphrase? Well, let's say that you are trying to relate some crucial key information from an essay, but you're trying to boil it down and make it easier to understand for the reader. And so, for an example, if you're trying to relate some information from a highly technical manual or a highly technical textbook, and it uses a lot of specialized jargon, if you're considering your audience, you want to make it digestible for them, then you're going to use paraphrase. You're going to use language that just makes it easier to understand. How is that different from summary? To summarize is to give a brief statement or account of the main points of something. Something being a movie, a television show, an essay, an article, and you're just boiling it down to really what is the most important information that the reader needs to know. A summary generally condenses a significantly longer text, conveying the argument not only for a few sentences, but also of entire paragraphs, essays, or books. Excuse me. And so a summary is going to be substantially shorter than the original text. And when do you summarize? It depends on the situation, but you typically summarize when you need to present only the key ideas of a passage or essay or a book to advance your argument. So you use summary according to the situation and what the audience needs and what the purpose of your own assignment is. So how do you write a summary? Like what do you do when you write a summary? Well, to write a really good summary, that's actually a really difficult task. It sounds like it's really easy because you're just you're boiling things down. You're not really coming up with your own ideas. You're staying neutral. So it sounds really easy, but to successfully summarize something is actually a pretty difficult skill to get good at. Like I'm almost 40 years old and summarizing is still really difficult to me. And so how do we get better at summarizing? Like how do we learn to do this? Well, believe it or not, most of the work that you put into a summary is actually going to happen during the actual reading process. So in order to write a really good summary, you have to read really closely and really mindfully. And so this unit is called Reading the Conversation. And so reading is a really, really important part of summarizing. And you can really help yourself out in your summaries if you put more mindful, close, attentive work into your reading practices. So most of the work that you're going to do in the summary is actually going to happen while you're reading. And so, as I note up here, learning how to write a good summary first starts with learning how to read closely, which is otherwise known as reading critically. And this is a really important skill to have, learning to read closely, and it's something that will benefit you through your entire college career and even beyond when you begin your professional careers. Like I said before at the beginning of this video, summary will be an important component of your rhetorical analysis. And so we're working on this now as a way to build up to that major assignment. What is reading critically? It is concentrated, active, and engaged reading. It is the opposite of passive reading. So when you passively read something, you just sit there and you read and you hold the book and you start at point A and you work to point B and your eyes scan the words and you just receive it. And that's about it. What is active reading? Well, active reading is when you're very mindful of what you're doing, when you're attentive and you're conscious about like what your task at hand is. And so obviously, when you sit down to summarize something, you can't like memorize the entire text, right? It's like you're going to be given an entire complicated essay that you need to summarize. Like you just can't memorize everything. Instead, if you're mindful about what the main points are, what the purpose of the author is, what they're trying to accomplish, what the larger context surrounding the issue is, then you're going to digest that material more successfully. That you're gonna remember details, that you're just gonna be more nimble with that information. And so how do you read closely? Well, before you even sit down to begin the essay or the book or the chapter, it's useful to get a sort of layout of the land, right? To sort of know what to expect. So before you dig into the text and you start reading it closely, you just simply want to spend some time scanning the text. Look at the way that the article or the book or the essay is organized and arranged. You know, read the title, look at the tables of contents, the front matter, just sort of skim through it. Are there subheaders? Is there a conclusion? What is the hook of the piece? Just sort of like, just get familiar with it. Try to get a sense of what you're going to be encountering before you start digging into the material. And also get a sense of the style, right? What sort of diction does the author use? What is their persona like? What is the tone of the piece like? So on and so forth. And another way to read actively is to read with a pen in your hand to annotate the text. And so what is it to annotate? To annotate is basically just to write and mark up the text that you're reading. And I know coming from high school and coming from, well, the way that I was raised, right? That I was taught that you don't mark up the books, right? Especially in the library, right? That when you mark up a book that you are sort of like desecrating the text, right? And it's sort of like this like impolite thing that you do. But what I learned later on in my college career that actually to mark up a text is a sign of respect, right? It shows that you're invested in the text. It shows that you're engaged in it. And then moreover, when you actively like write on a text, like it's going to help you digest and remember these things. Like you're making it like an active event, right? And so another way to think about annotation, another word for it is marginalia, right? Like you're writing things down in the margins. You're underlying key sentences or key phrases. You're drawing boxes around things that you want to return to. You're drawing circles around arguments that you think are really good or main points. And so it's just, you know, it's getting the text dirty. And other things to keep in mind, right, is also, you know, asking questions about the text as well.